Thank you. Rachel, need to have a little orientation with her. 3 minutes is where we are here.
I have to say your favorite. I'm not even.
You are my favorite. That's why I need you to talk to her. Next time I do something and y'all don't like it, instead of having a bunch of goons jump me out in the parking lot, just tell me, stop. Anyway, Jenni's with us. We know this is her second time to speak to us. We can't remember which other time, and our archives go back to 2012. So she's been with the Oklahoman since 1999. She is a Clay Center, Kansas native. Rock Chalk grad 1997, Phi Beta Kappa, right? And she was the first woman to be hired as a sports columnist at a newspaper in Oklahoma. And she's now lived in Oklahoma more years than she has in Kansas, so she considers herself proudly an Oklahoman. So we will hope that you have better luck when you return back to your office than Garen Emig the last time he spoke here. No, it's so true. But Trammell told me y'all are in so much better spot than that. And he said, no, that won't happen around here. And I said, okay. So anyway, Jenni, come on up. Thanks for coming.
I got this. Well, now I'm a lot more scared than I was about 2 minutes ago. No, Barry's right. We're in better shape, but Garen's a great guy. I'm glad to know that y'all got to hear from him, and I know you regularly hear from Barry. And yeah, and I don't remember when I spoke to y'all. I don't think it was here. So Chris and I were talking that you had some nomadic years where you moved around. I think I might have come in the nomadic times, which is fine. I'm good with that. By the way, Hannah, congratulations. Which section of band were you the leader?
I'm a flute player.
Yes, I was a flute player. This is kismet. I feel better all of a sudden. Never mind what happened to Garen. I'm feeling on the up and up. Well, thanks so much for having me here today. I appreciate the invitation. It's obviously July. It's kind of the down season for sports in Oklahoma right now, but only kind of, because next week is Big 12 football media days. And for us, I don't know about for you, but for us, that's kind of the unofficial start to the football season. So while it may seem like a little bit of a dead period, it's actually just about to get really, really busy for us. I noticed looking around the room, decent amount of orange. So I thought y'all might want to talk a little Oklahoma State athletics, if that's okay. I mean, we could talk Thunder, OU, or whatever, but I thought OSU might be a good one. So obviously tons of really good stuff going on in Oklahoma State sports. I mean, really across the board. I wrote this last weekend as July 1st hit and the Big 12 expanded. Obviously 14 teams for this next year. We'll go back to 12. Unless there's conference expansion again, we'll go back to 12 next year. And where does Oklahoma State fit in the puzzle of 12? And I think Oklahoma State's in great shape to be really towards the top of the pack because of a lot of things. But one of the big things is the overall excellence of the athletic teams at Oklahoma State. I mean, you could really look down the list, and pretty much every team has a chance to contend for conference championships. And if you contend for conference championships, you contend for national championships, whether it's the 14-team Big 12 or the 12-team Big 12. So lots of really good stuff going on. But I think it's safe to say that there are two sports that kind of transcend everything else in popularity, football and softball. And I'm going to tell you the softball numbers that we see, the readership that we see from our website for softball, it's off the charts. I mean, it is huge. We got to the end of the Women's College World Series a few weeks ago, and we had 1 million page views from the beginning of the year until then that was softball related. Which, if you're in internet stuff, 1 million of anything, it's a pretty good number. So we feel like that those two have become really the premier sports in our state. But obviously, everything in Oklahoma starts with football, so let's start there. So as I mentioned, the unofficial start to football season next week down in Dallas, down at Jerry World. We take over the field. They set up a big stage. We go down there and talk to all sorts of folks. 7 teams a day with 14 in the conference. We'll have 2 days. Oklahoma State, Mike Gundy will be there, obviously. But then they're bringing Colin Oliver, Corey Black off of the defense, and Brennan Presley and Preston Wilson off of the offense. Some good stuff happened earlier this week as all Big 12 preseason team was announced, and Colin Oliver and Brennan Presley were on the first team, actually the only team. They just do a team for all conference preseason. And Kendall Daniels was also picked. I thought those 3 guys were absolutely deserved on that team, and super cool that all 3 of those guys are from the state of Oklahoma, products of Oklahoma high schools. Colin Oliver from Edmond Santa Fe, Brendan Presley from Bixby, and Kendall Daniels from Beggs. So 3 guys that are not only representing Oklahoma State, but Oklahoma, which I just thought was super cool. You know, I was thinking, though, it is kind of interesting to think what that all-conference team might have looked like had Oklahoma State not lost a bunch of starters into the transfer portal. I know the words transfer portal make a lot of fans, you know, like ready to jump out of their skin. Maybe Katie Norris as much as anybody because she lives with it. But, you know, you think about so many of these guys that left Oklahoma State, whether you start with Spencer Sanders going to Ole Miss, Trace Ford going to the school down south, Mason Cobb going to USC, Bryson Green to Wisconsin. I mean, the list just goes on. And I don't know who of those guys might have jumped up over, you know, somebody that did make that all-conference team, but pretty clearly Oklahoma State lost, they lost some talent into the transfer portal. I mean, some of those guys left for maybe bigger, better opportunities of playing time, but I think in the case of the starters, I think some of them were after that name, image, likeness money, which we'll talk about here in just a second too. But those departures, now they brought in guys, and I'll talk about those in just a second, but I really think this is a pivotal year for Oklahoma State. As you know, Chris was mentioning, the softball team sort of had a swoon, but then came out of it. Well, football had a swoon and didn't really come out of it. They were a whole different team. You know, they got through about 6 games and were ranked in the top 10 in the country. And I know in our office we started thinking about, okay, who's going to go to the Big 12 championship game? You know, what if they made college football playoff? We started to sort of talk about those contingency plans of what if, and then things turn around. Obviously, Spencer Sanders gets hurt. That obviously hurts the offense, hurts the team. But they just really, really struggled. Finished 7-6, which ran their streak of winning seasons to 17. There's only one other college football program in the country that has a streak of winning records that goes that long, and it's Wisconsin. So you talk about really rare air of success and longevity. Oklahoma State fits that, but to me, this next season is going to be really vital for the Cowboys with the turnover they had. But then also, you get to decide with your performance on the field, was 7-6 the outlier, or was 7-6 the start of something not so good? So I think that this is really vital that they, you know, I'm not saying you got to go try to win the Big 12 title or anything, but you need to sort of come back from what was not a really fun year for a lot of people. And, you know, it's interesting, when the Big 12 schedule came out, Big 12 football schedule came out, a lot of people were a little bit surprised at some of the teams that weren't on Oklahoma State's schedule. You know, non-conference, Central Arkansas, go to Arizona State, and then South Alabama. But then the conference schedule is at Iowa State, then Kansas State and Kansas here in Stillwater, go to West Virginia, and then have Cincinnati, Oklahoma here, then finish with at UCF. I still want to call them Central Florida. Sorry, I hear they don't like that, so UCF it is. At Houston and then BYU. So finishing with 3 of the new teams on the schedule. So it kind of stacks up as a little bit easier schedule because no TCU, which obviously they played for a national championship last year. No Texas Tech, which seems to be really, you know, kind of on the uptick. And no Texas. So while it's weird that OSU only has 1 game in the state of Texas, they're going to go down and play Houston, but to have those other teams not on the schedule, I know it's kind of a head scratcher. I definitely didn't expect that to be the case. But it may work out for the best. Oklahoma State may come out of that schedule, 8, 9, maybe even flirting with 10 wins or more, just because they don't have maybe some of those tougher games, those tougher Texas opponents on their schedule. We'll have to see. And I think they've got a chance to have a rebound year, because even though they lost so many guys, they really did get some talented guys back. Here's some names that I'm going to be looking for. Obviously, you lose your quarterback. You got to find a new one. They may have one already on campus who played last year, but they also brought in Oklahoman from Michigan. And I think it's going to be interesting to see, as they lost, they lost obviously Spencer. They also lose Dominique Richardson out of the backfield. They lose several wide receivers to the transfer portal. So bringing in a different kind of quarterback, Spencer Sanders, felt like he'd been here for a lot of years, for the better. I think when you've got a guy that talented, if you can keep him around for a while, it's a good thing. But they really did kind of have to build their offense around his skill set, and he was very mobile. Their offensive line at times struggled, so they tailored some things towards that. So can they, with sort of needing to, the necessity of replacement, can they go out and maybe do something a little bit different? I don't know. I think it's going to be interesting to see if they go with Alan Bowman, who's definitely not as agile and fast as Spencer Sanders. Does the offense look a little different? I don't know what it's going to look like, but I think it's an interesting question and sort of maybe outcropping of the transfer portal that we might see when it comes to Oklahoma State's offense. Then the other guys that I'm interested in are largely on the defensive side. You've got guys like Anthony Goodlow, who's a local guy. He went to Tulsa from Del City High School, started out as a linebacker in college, but now is a defensive end. And I think he's going to remind people a little bit of like a Trace Ford, kind of that tall, lanky, got the long arms, very fast. I think he'll be very interesting on the defensive line. And then he's likely to be lined up again next to a guy named Justin Kirkland. And this guy, I've got a smile on my face, because this guy, he came in at 6'4", 295 pounds. And I wouldn't be surprised if maybe he goes to a little more towards 300 by the time the season started. I got a chance to meet him at Pro Day back in March. March in Oklahoma, it can be, a little warmer. This particular March day, it was pretty cold outside. Justin, who played his first few years of college football at Utah Tech, so he's from the state of Utah, he shows up in a tank top, shorts, and flip-flops. He looked like a tree trunk walking around ready for the beach in March in Stillwater. I think this guy's going to be really fun to watch, and I think he's got an interesting personality. So keep Justin Kirkland's name in your mind as you see what that retooled defensive line looks like for the Cowboys this year. And then lastly, I'd say Justin Wright, a linebacker who's coming over from Tulsa, was a huge part of their defense and is going to be here for a limited time, but I think he's the veteran type of guy that could really come in handy for this defense as they sort of look to stabilize a little bit. So I think he'll be a big-time player for Oklahoma State on the defensive side. Okay, football, we'll set it over here for a second. Softball, let's talk some softball. I know this has got a lot of people here fired up, and rightfully so. I love what Kenny Gajewski and his staff have done with softball. And I'm not just saying that because Katie's here, Chris is here. I'm not just saying that because of that. 4 consecutive Women's College World Series appearances. They went in 19, obviously 20, COVID wiped it out completely, and then have gone every year since. The only other program that has a string of 4 is OU. So, I mean, this is the kind of, again, the longevity and success that you would really want to see out of a program. When we talk about transfers, I think Kenny's done, he was actually doing the transfer thing to a high level before the portal even arrived. He brought in people like Samantha Shao, Carrie Eberly, players that were not in the portal, that didn't exist, but they transferred here and became centerpieces for his program. Now it's just easier to get the transfers. Last year they brought in Lexi Kilfoyle, Megan Bloodworth, Rachel Becker, Michaela Wark, and those were all regular either starters or contributors to the team, and that's just last year. And they've already got at least 3 that I know of. There may be more. That's a huge impact on a team to have that many important pieces transfer in. But I think the thing that is really cool about what Kenny's done with the program is having this really nice mix between the transfers and the players that come in from the high school ranks and really stay all 4 years. I mean, you think about the players last year who you could say that about, whether it was Kelly Maxwell, Kylie Naomi, Cheyenne Factor, Taylor Tuck. I mean, the list goes on. And these were players that came in as high schoolers and have stayed. Kelly Maxwell's coming back next year for a 6th season. She'll be a Cowgirl for 6 years by the time she's done. So just a really, really cool mix. And freshmen, too. They had some very impactful freshmen last year. Talon Edwards, Kyra Aycock throwing, Katie Lott. I mean, they've got a good mix of the young and the developed through the program and also the transfers. I really think that when it comes to the portal and the NIL that has now become such a big deal in college athletics, the teams that navigate sort of finding that balance, I think they're going to do best, whether we're talking about football, softball, baseball. You might be able to get by with just a huge infusion of transfers in basketball because you only have to put the 5 out there. You know, you can, if you get 2 or 3, maybe you can make over a basketball team quicker. We saw it with K-State men's basketball, did that with transfers and NIL. We saw it with Miami's women's basketball team, which actually knocked out Oklahoma State's women's basketball team in the NCAA tournament. Then they made a deep run. So it happens in basketball, and there's obviously transfers in all sports that make a huge difference, but I think the programs that have that base of athletes that they've brought in, that they've developed, that are knowledgeable about what the program does and how it wins and how it operates, I really think that's where programs will find the most success. So we'll see if that plays out. We've only just begun the NIL transfer portal days, so we really, to be determined what it all looks like in another 5 or 10 years. The last thing I'll say about softball before I mention NIL and the portal here for a second is I know how disappointing the end was for softball at the Women's College World Series. 2 years in a row, they get right towards the end. A year ago, it was made it to the Final Four. This year, they made the Final 6 and didn't quite make that last step into the championship series. Believe me, no one wanted them there more than I did. I was really hoping for a Bedlam championship series at the Women's College World Series. I think it would have been outrageously fun and exciting, and it would have packed the place, and people would have just been going crazy. So I know it was disappointing to the team and a lot of fans, but I think as a program to have that consistency of knocking at the door, kicking at the door, whatever action you're going to do, you got to maybe do that a couple times before you're really ready to make that next step. So we'll see. I don't have any reason to believe from what I've seen of the players that are coming in for Oklahoma State softball and the players that remain that they're going to be a top 5, top 10 preseason team again, which is likely to put them in play to sort of make it back to the Women's College World Series next year. So I would not be surprised if, I don't know if they'll kick at it or kick it open next year, but I think they're going to have a chance to continue to do what they've been doing. I'm going to take questions here in a second. I would definitely want to leave time for that. But as I mentioned, NIL and the portal have definitely, become part of everything that's going on in college athletics right now. I even had a conversation with a football assistant coach who said he really thinks because of the way that you have to always be basically recruiting your own players, looking at who might be coming into the portal, who might be leaving you in the portal, what's happening with NIL. It's so all-encompassing that it has really been hard for assistants who have families especially. And he thinks that we may be seeing, and I don't know if this will hold with all sports, but I don't know why it wouldn't, where you'd have maybe coaches who are a little bit older, families that are older, kids that are out of the house, and then younger assistants who maybe haven't started families yet. You sort of start to see that middle decrease a little bit because coaches just say, I don't get to see my kids. I don't get to see my wife. I'm never at home because we have to do this all the time. And I know they get paid handsomely for it. I get it. But I do think that's an interesting, sort of maybe unintended consequence that could come from this. And frankly, that's kind of what we're dealing with right now is unintended consequences. I think that's the thing that makes most people maddest when it comes to the portal and NIL. We've seen it in football with, some universities cutting head coaches loose really early in the year just so they can start the process of finding the next head coach. some head coaches being hired, well, right after their teams are done. We saw it happen with Lincoln Riley. We saw it happen with Brian Kelly. So yes, there are unintended consequences, and I think there could be more. I mean, I don't know where we're headed with all of this, but it's important we've seen that those schools that cut their head coaches loose early and start the process quickly, they do it because they want to get a jump on the transfer portal. And it's worked. USC made a huge surge last year, first year under Lincoln Riley, with a ton of transfers. And then we saw the downward trajectory of what happened at OU when they didn't get the jump because they didn't know they were losing their coach. So it's unfortunate, but it's actually, I mean, for the schools, it's the right thing to do. So the schools have to, they have to build, they can build winners with NIL, they can build it with the portal. But even though I know a lot of people get really frustrated with some of these changes and some of those consequences, for a long time have believed that athletes didn't have near enough power in college athletics. Maybe there was a day and time when the finances, and there was a day and time when the finances were, that the getting a college scholarship, it balanced out. If you looked at coaches' salaries and how much an athletic department made, okay, you can see where that makes a lot of sense. But now athletic departments are making this, and coaches are making this, and athletes were still making this before NIL. So I lament those unintended consequences and some of the things we've seen come from both of those things. But for athletes to get more power, my personal opinion is I'm going to live with it, because I just really think when these athletes see coaches making millions, when they see coaches leaving before their contracts are up. I had somebody say the other day, well, when they legislate that coaches can't leave before the end of their contracts, then we can do away with some of this stuff. And I said, well, you and I know that's not going to happen. And of course that's not going to happen. So I think to leave some of the power in the hands of the athletes, the NIL, the portal, that's sort of where we've come down to try to balance some of those inequities out. So I have a few minutes for questions. I would love to answer anything that you might want to ask, OSU or otherwise. If not, I can blather on some more, but I'm sure you have much more interesting questions than.
Jen, thank you for coming today.
Absolutely, thank you.
This question is about future Big 12 expansion.
Absolutely.
The latest reading I've seen is that we're waiting around for the Pac-12 to negotiate their TV rights.
Yes.
And that's holding up everything.
Yes.
So can you talk about possible the Big 12 poaching some of those schools?
I think the Big 12 keeps poking the bear a little bit, trying to, let these Pac-12 schools know. Just actually on, I think it was June 30th, so the day before the new members became final, the Big 12's media rights deal, it actually reached its finality. And we already knew the details. They had done them several weeks ago. But the Big 12 put out a release, put out an announcement, put it out on social media, all this, about its media rights deal. It's done, it's this, it's that, comments from the commissioner. And I think it was just another sort of shot across the bow to the Pac-12 to say, yeah, we've got our deal set up. All you schools that are worried that the Pac-12 has nothing in hand, come talk to us. And so I think, I don't know who they're going to be, but if they would go, get Colorado seems like a school that a lot of people have talked about, obviously an old Big 12 member. So they could come back and then, maybe it'd be a pair. Maybe you'd look at, Arizona State, something like that. And with BYU out there, it makes a lot of sense. You would have some more geography that makes sense, so BYU's not flying so far across the country. So I don't pretend to know any more than anybody else, but if I was those Pac-12 schools, I'd be getting a little bit worried myself. So I wouldn't be surprised if there was percolating talk as the summer goes on.
With the results of this last year's OSU teams, do you anticipate any changes in coaches?
Oh, yeah. That's a good question. I really don't, unless they would leave to go somewhere else. I think it was a year or two ago, that there was some thought that Texas A&M, that was last year, that Texas A&M would come after Kenny Gajewski, and they may well have. He got a raise and extension, and I think that was the right thing to do. I don't anticipate much in the way of change. I think at this point, it's been pretty quiet, and unless something really unexpected, maybe off the field or off the court would happen. You know, obviously we saw what happened at West Virginia with Bob Huggins, had a DUI, and they, you know, had to fire him. You don't really see a ton of firings now at this point. So I think no. I think they're going to stand pat probably moving into 23, 24. Oh. Sorry.
Unlike the NBA or NFL, you hear about what the athletes are paid. Is the NIL strictly a private situation of what the athletes are being paid or who's paying them?
Yeah.
Or is it a public thing where you can find out?
Well, that's an interesting question. I think the NCAA is trying to figure out the answer to that question. A lot of it is done privately through different groups, collectives, some of them are called, where fans and boosters can pool their money, and then that can go to the athletes. But at this point, we've actually done some things both locally and with our corporate overhead, which is Gannett, to try to get some of those numbers and find out what some of these, you know, deals do look like. But a lot of it is done. The schools, to my understanding, they can't develop the deals, but because they don't want to run afoul of something happening and causing an athlete to be ineligible. Like when, for example, when the softball team did the deal with, there was a car dealership in Perry they did the deal with, and one of the associate athletic directors was involved to at least see the inner workings of the deal and make sure that they weren't going to run afoul of their eligibility. So there's some interaction, but to my understanding, those in department people cannot go out and solicit deals. They can't go to the car dealership and say, hey, what do you think about this? Those deals have to come from the private side.
What are your thoughts on Casey Dunn?
I like Casey a lot. When I mentioned earlier what the offense may look like with some new personnel, I was thinking about him a lot as I think about that, because, you know, he took over and COVID hits, and so then we've got the COVID year was his first year, and then I can't remember if it was that year or the year after, they had big offensive line injuries. Like basically we're starting guys on the offensive line that they never intended to start. He's kind of along the way, and then obviously last year Spencer gets hurt. Along the way he's kind of had things that have popped up that he's never really been able to do what he wants to do. Now I don't know if this year is the year that he sort of throws off the shackles and just says, let's go, let's do whatever we think we can do best. But in the way that this is a pretty important year for overall Oklahoma State football, I think this is a pretty important year for him too, to really kind of show what he can bring to the offense as it retools.
With the school down south joining the SEC, how is that going to change the way our state media sources, you know, news, Oklahoman, cover the conference as a whole?
Yeah, it's a whole new world for us. I mean, where we used to be able to drive pretty much everywhere except West Virginia to cover conference games, now we've got a lot more flights to a lot more places, which we'll manage, we'll do. We are not cutting back on how many we send to those road games. So, and then obviously next year we'll have, you know, 2 conferences involved. But our intention is to continue with the way that we've covered the football and basketball and everything basically the same way. We will, we send, at our place, we send 2 beat writers for both OU and OSU. We send a columnist to every football game. We're going to, as far as I know, continue to do that. And so we won't change. And Barry Trammell and I really try to balance out. If he's going to write OSU one day, I will try to write OU the next, and we try to swap if we can. So we may not reach a perfect harmonious balance, but we come pretty close because we're very mindful that we've got passionate fans at both schools, and when they're not in the same conference, those fans are still going to be every bit as passionate as they were. So yeah, my anticipation is it won't really change what we do. I can't speak for TV and other outlets, obviously. You know, I think the news press here will continue to, you know, cover Oklahoma State the same as they've always done, whereas Norman Transcript, same for them, covering OU. You know, the websites that are out there, I think they'll continue to follow it the same way. So yeah, there's a few of us that sort of straddle into both, but I think we're ready for that challenge. I know I'm looking forward to it, having some different schools to throw in the mix and write about too.
Very good.
Thank you. Thanks. Appreciate it.